All right, guys. Hope everybody can hear me. Welcome to another interesting edition of Victory Never Sleeps. My computer or StreamYard did some kind of update, so you may notice I'm doing this on my phone. My camera does not work, which causes me a great deal of frustration, but it do. I may end up playing with some stuff during the broadcast to try to make something work. Hopefully we'll have it figured out a little bit better for you next time. But yeah, hopefully everybody can hear me and this works okay for right now.
Normally I'm the one that has technical difficulties.
Well, it's one of those things. I had no warning. I was like, okay, I'll just sign on and get right on. And apparently the powers that be changed the rules on me. So we will see what's up with that. All right. So there is still time, but not a lot of it. If you can make it this upcoming weekend, we are going to have Friar's Harvest Feast in Montana. I am looking forward to that. That should be awesome. It's going to be a beautiful spot. It's my first time.
Ooh. Bit of an echo there. Well,
so I'm currently things, as you might can see. I'm getting on my laptop because it is easier to use than trying to do it on my phone. Camera quality is not as good as I am noticing, but we will make it work. All right. So less good, but I will take it for this evening. Yeah, Friar's Harvest Feast coming up. I am looking forward to that. It will be very exciting coming up this weekend. Should be awesome. I don't think it's going to be about the perfect temperature to be out there and enjoying it. Looking forward to spending some time with our folk in that part of the country. If you can make it, we would love to see you there. There's still time. If you're interested, get a hold of your local folk builder and they can get you all set up. Also coming up in October, we are going to have Winter Nights in New Hampshire for the very first time. That's going to be amazing. It is the perfect, most beautiful time of year to be doing that there. So I am very excited about it. I hope to see all of you guys. It's the first time having it that far north on that coast. It's the first time having any major AFA event that far north on that coast. So hopefully we can get some of our members who maybe it's been a little bit more difficult to travel to in previous years to be able to come out. I'd love to meet all of them and all of you that would like to show up. So if you can do that, please reach out to your local folk builder. They'll get you all set up.
I will be there and bringing my barber gear as per tradition.
You heard it here, folks. No, that'll be awesome. You can meet me. You can meet Svan. He can tell you tales of volcanic Iceland and cut your hair, and that'll be awesome. So yeah, looking forward to that. And then Feast of the Einherjar coming up in November. So that'll be really nice. We've got, as you can see, a number of cool things coming up and opportunities to get out there, meet other members of your AFA family, and get involved. So it's a good time to do that, and we would love to see you guys there. Think that's where we're at. If you are consuming this broadcast and you like it, despite my poor audio visual quality this week, please like, share, subscribe, send this out, get other people on here. Word of mouth is very important to what we do. Certainly helps out a lot. You can find us a lot of different places. Our biggest reach at present is here on YouTube and over on Twitter. So it's the first time I've noticed that Nick put a little X cap on top of the little Twitter bird. That's clever. Yeah, so also We come out as a podcast on Fridays. So wherever you're consuming this, please bring your questions. We are even on shows like today where we're going through a bit of lore. It is very much a question-driven program. So we would welcome any of your questions. If they are relevant to the piece of lore that we are going through, we'll try to get to them, immediately or close thereabouts. If not, we may save them till the end of the program, but we will get to them given enough time. With that, so we're going to be going through the Alvíssmál today. We go through, and Nick will put a link up for you, but we go through the Bellows translation. As always, please use whatever translation you prefer. There's cool stuff we may find in each of them that might add some to it or give somebody a little bit different perspective. So we certainly welcome that. Svan, what do folks need to know about the Alvíssmál before we dive in?
Couple of things. There's one. This is a fantastic poem. It's very, very. It's cleanly anchored. There's parts in the poem that are very, very orderly, and then there's some following parts that are kind of sporadic. So it will go orderly, sporadic. And what I find in those poems is that you have the ability to follow along a lot easier. It is a great poem about Lord Thor, who I am the Gothi of Thorshof. So this has a special place in my heart. And again, it really emphasizes on one of Thor's traits that is not often spoken about, and that really is his deep wisdom and his cunning. So that gets to be shown. Some of the things that is worth noting, though, so this is this poem will emphasize greatly about cosmology and the importance of cosmology and the importance of why things are where they are, in comparison to the way that a lot of folks are trying to change cosmology. So I think there's a re-emphasization on that. That's very, very important. And then the other thing is the ultimate reasoning behind this poem, just like in Grimnismal, just like in Fafrudnersmal, this is a lesson for poets. And ultimately, I would argue Asatru, or folk that are Asatru, loyal to the gods, as a must to go through and to learn in order to give. It's a roadmap. It's a poetic roadmap. It's a cosmological roadmap, and it really does give a lending to the way that wordplay is done, and that our ancestors saw the spirits of other realms as having willful minds that perceive. So this is going to be good. I love this. It's a short poem, so we'll have it. I think we'll have it over generally swiftly, and then taking questions during and also after. Though I mean, granted, we have talked.
It's funny. We have some of these that we just rip through, and I'm silent. Svan reads you a poem, and then we go into something at the end, and then we have others where we will torturously go through, one or two verses because, and this is one of the things that I love about the format of this program, and I hope you guys too. I can see it being annoying if you are here for the story itself, but the conversations, either through your questions or through the pieces of lore that we go over, they spark ideas, and discussing those ideas with my esteemed colleague Svan here, it gives different angles on stuff, and each angle and each answer and discussion sometimes awakens a different thought or a different idea or a different point of connectivity. So I hope you guys find those valuable. May sound selfish, but I certainly do get a lot out of those. It's neat, and I'm appreciate the opportunity to go over this lore again in this format with you guys. It's when you are brand new to Asatru, that seems like there's just this pile of lore to go through and all of these things to discover. And once you're a few decades in, if you're doing it right, it's stuff you've already we've all read the same stuff. But it's really interesting to go over our lore at different stages in your life, different seasons of what you have going on and perspectives you have, coming back to it with wisdom you've gained, but also going through it with a different audience. If you are one who does lore studies, like many people do, if you do it with somebody different or somebody new, they may see things in a different way or bring something different to the table that really changes, doesn't change the core message, but certainly adds layers and adds depth. And I'm getting a lot out of going through this with you guys and with Svan, so I'm appreciative for the opportunity. Also, a couple of people have decided to be generous to us this evening. Someone bought us 3 coffees. Don't know what that means, but we appreciate them anyways. Thank you very much. That's a $15 donation. We also have regular contributor, generous gentleman, G.W. Farnsworth, who bought us 5 coffees. Thank you so much for that. It just came to our attention that running Victory Never Sleeps has just increased in price, or will in the next month. So your donations, you guys are awesome. You're generous. So we profit well beyond the cost of running the show, but the cost has gone up. I think the cost has just about doubled with the new stuff. It's still very worth doing.
Be More Heathen, thank you so much for giving well wishes to my family. They're doing great. Everybody's doing great, from 103-year-old great grandma all the way down to the 4-year-old. So we're all doing good. Thank you, though.
Excellent. It's good to see you back in the chat room. Also, we are joined by our newest apprentice folk builder from the Sunshine State of Florida, Alexander Casto. Thank you very much for joining us this evening. It's good to see you here, and thank you for stepping up as an apprentice folk builder. It's about time. I remember you talked to me about that when I was down there back in February. So it's good to see that you wanted to help out in that way.
Oh, and he was the mysterious 3 coffee.
Well, even better. Thank you so much. We appreciate that. And like I said, good to have you on the team.
It legitimately went through as someone, so that's what I put.
That counts. No, that's not on you. And I wish I could blame my camera malfeasance on you, but I cannot. I have no idea what that issue is either. So I think we're set up and ready. Svan, would you like to? I feel like there was something else I was gonna throw. Oh yeah, so Brandon was talking about how my head looked very small at the cell phone angle. That is interesting to hear, because my head is actually very large. It is difficult to find hats that fit my head. People have been kind of surprised by that when they try to put on a hat that I was wearing. But yeah, my head is notoriously too large and bulbous. So
I can confirm it's like an optical illusion. You don't body size to head size, and you look proportioned, and then like your hats are massive. All right.
Svan, if you would like to, if you could go ahead and start us out.
Okay, let's see. Oh, and I was gonna say too. I know that there's 31 people watching on YouTube, but there are only 7 likes.
Uh-oh.
That's I can only assume that outside of those 7, there are people out there with less than good intentions. Hit the like button.
I don't know. Maybe we gotta step our game up a little bit.
When you refresh, there's actually 16, but that's still, not
nice.
enough.
All right, well, we will work harder to earn your likes.
Yeah, so okay. Couple of things. And again, we've kind of reemphasized the reason why we're using bellows. So I won't go too much into that, but Bellows' translations have a certain balance between practicality and I would say not mystical, but just it has a flair in the language that gives it to where it is not so mundane, but it is also not so cryptic. And it does allow for us to go into things. So, Bellows translations, and if you read in the notes in the introductory section, he does talk about how this poem is one of the last poems about the gods before, excluding the heroic lays that's in the Codex Regius. And the poem itself is again a skaldic teaching of kennings, excuse me, and teaches the poet how to use certain words or to give them a plethora of words to use, and that was, I think, the major cause of many poems, because at that time everything was traveling by word of mouth, and there was no written dictionary. And I think this is a fallacy of our ancestors. I really think that our ancestors should have picked up to writing much faster. And the Icelanders definitely made up for lost time. I remember my mother even telling me when I was younger that when the Danes, they put an embargo on Iceland to where they couldn't get food, and that they were actually boiling and eating their books because the books were made of vellum and made from the intestine of sheep. And so I wonder about that, because there's a part in the story here that alludes to another story, and we've talked about that numerous times during our VNS about the lore. And I wonder just how much of those were lost simply because they were destroyed or eaten. I mean, the horror of it. But Icelanders in the Nordic lands have always kind of been seen as the ones who wrote things down, the ones who told the stories. So it's really important that we hold on to the ones we have and that we make sense of how they are categorized. So this is Alvíssmál. If anybody's familiar, the great, I don't know. Actually, I'm not a huge follower of him, but the great American singer Elvis. The name Elvis is from this Nordic name, Alvis, which means all wise or all knowing. And Maul, of course, is the speech or the saying of. So this is the saying of the all wise. And I think it kind of holds a purposeful misleading. Normally when you hear that, and I think with our ancestors too, the inclination would to think towards Lord Odin. And then we have a story about Lord Thor, and it's about wisdom, and it is about cunning. So I find that very, very poetic, for lack of a better word. So moving into the first part here, we have 1 through 5 stanzas, and there isn't much of a proposing. Alvis is in a place. They don't ever specify whether he is in heaven amongst the gods. They don't specify if this is in the middle world or in Jotunheim or in Svartalfheim. It's never really processed, except that Alvis moves to this place to claim brideship. So it's pretty safe to assume he has moved into heaven. And whether or not he is in the domain of the gods, i.e., Ausgarður, because there is, our ancestors saw heaven as an expanse with Ausgarð in it, walled within it. It doesn't really state, but as we start to go in, we will see more about the cosmological mapping. And it's pretty funny here, something that I hope you guys catch on to in the way that Alvis is speaking to Lord Thor. So, part 1, or stanza 1, Alvis speaks. Now shall the bride my benches adorn, and homeward haste forthwith. Eager for wedlock, to all shall I seem, nor at home shall they rob me of rest. And so pretty straightforward, cutting right into it. He's arrived, and he is looking for a bride. And, that my benches will adorn. That means, of course, to, his feasting table will have a beautiful woman. And no one at home will ever see him rest until this happens. Thor speaks. What, pray, art thou? Why so pale around the nose? By the dead hast thou lain of late? To a giant like dost thou look, methinks. Thou wast not born for the bride. So Thor comes in and immediately starts kind of laying the insults down, like, how did you get here? And why are you so pale about the nose? I think this is more about just a reference to the idea of a pallid face, a face that has like circles under the eyes, and just generally ugly. And he says, I don't think you are suited for a bride. I don't think you're going to have much luck with the ladies. And Alvis retorts in 3, Alvis am I, and under the earth my home neath the rocks I have. With the wagon guider a word do I seek. Let the gods their bonds not break. So this is the first part that I mentioned, where there may be destruction of stories that go far beyond simply just being lost, that they may have been destroyed, and often to feed people. Because this is lending towards the idea that the gods made a bond towards Alvis. There may have been some story in which the situation that's about to unfold with Alvis was promised to him, but we don't know. We don't know where it survives. He also makes mention that he is underneath the earth, my home beneath the rocks. And this is important to understand the cosmological view of our ancestors. Our ancestors saw that the earth that they were standing on, and underneath it, in the flesh of Ymir, is where the Svartalf or the Dvergar live. And now in our faith, I think that we reside to more look at the Svartalvar or the Dvergar as spirits of elemental power, spirits of energy and elements and how they interact with extreme heat, kind of the building blocks of the material. Kind of, if you're looking at the proto matter of the world creating Ymir, and the Jotuns have power over that matter, the Svartalfar are kind of the builders of matter. They are the ones that kind of constantly churn it and change it in order to be revitalized again. And he's looking for the wagon guider. The wagon guider clearly is a reference to Lord Thor, who rides the chariot or guides the wagon behind his goats. And so Thor speaks, and he speaks rather abruptly. Break it shall I, for over the bride her father has foremost right. At home was I not when the promise thou hadst, and I give her alone of the gods. So because he said the wagon rider and the kenning is already placed there, he says, no, I shall break that bond, because the requirement of ultimate of the brideship of my daughter is my blessing, and that's not gonna happen. No one else can give her up amongst the gods. So whoever said that you could get together, whether it was Loki or any of the other gods, that is irrelevant. My blessing is the final word. And I think it's also kind of speaks well. I know that perhaps our ancestors didn't think of it this way. When we speak of the idea of clearly the gods are up above, in the center, high in the high heaven, and a base creature of the earth, having their uses and having their strengths, was still not seen. Clearly, is not a suitable suitor for his daughter, and the hierarchy there is kind of understood, is placed. It's the Aus or the Aesir, the Ljósalfar or light elves, and then humanity in the middle, and then beneath that is. But I don't think that placement is too heavily focused on. What I think more is it is about the closeness to the gods as far as their dominion. So the gods have dominion in Ausgarður. They have dominion in Ljósalfheim. They have dominion in Midgard. They have dominion in Vanaheim. But Svartalfheim and Jotunheim and Niflheim, they have little to no dominion. And I think that that's the ultimate message that's being kind of stated here in the hierarchy of spiritual beings. And Alvis, who I find this super funny because he's all wise, but he says this: what hero claims such a right to hold o'er the bride that shines so bright? Not many well know thee, thou wandering man, who was brought with rings to bear thee. So he's all wise, but he has yet to realize who he's talking to. And I think this is, again, a foreshadowing. He's speaking of Lord Thor as being a tramp, or being a bedecked wanderer in rags. And we see this clearly with Lord Odin. And normally I would attest these symbolic meanings to the idea that the gods become mundane, or they become into the middle. So they lessen their power in order to interact within the weird and within time that they control. But if this is in heaven, it seems to me to be kind of a funny exchange. And ultimately, again, if he's so wise, he hasn't realized, and being massive and carrying Gridavol, the iron rod, in his belt, and having Eon Gripper and Eon Glover, didn't give it away, I guess. So pretty funny. So we move into stanza 6, and Thor speaks. Ving Thor, the wanderer, wide am I, and I am Sithgrani's son. Against my will shalt thou get the maid and win the marriage word. So he says, I am hurling or throwing Thor, is my Heiti, it says in the Nordic translation. And he travels wide. This is again, you'll see a lot of kennings towards Lord Thor that reference riding. There's Einrider, meaning the lone rider, or there is Hlorider, which we talked about in a previous VNS, where a cacophonous rider. And this, of course, is referencing to thunder. But Thor is in Midgard more than any other of the Aesir. That, according to lore, I'm not going to speak for the reality of things, but according to the lore, and I think according to the mental view of our ancestors, Lord Thor is deeply connected to the earth, and his point is to constantly stave off the ever-encroaching power of the Jotnar as they are attempting to unbalance the middle. And that makes sense. He's connected to the earth. His mother is the earth. His father is of the sky. And in all Aryan mythos, we find that the striker, this profile, is deeply connected to the earth, not the underworld, oftentimes completely unable to or should not go into the underworld. His premise of the tripartite is he is the catalytic or the catalytic aspect of the tripartite. So the movement really is through thresholds, sideways, up and down, but mainly concerning with the middle, and riding, throwing his hammer, keeping all things in balance. And so our ancestors definitely felt that nature was constantly on the brim of pouring over, and that the gods, specifically Lord Thor, was keeping balance and protecting them. And I just find it interesting when they were doing the ice samples in, I think it was Antarctica. It might have been in the Arctic. I can't quite remember, but there was kind of like a very clear and visible point in which the sporadic and extremely long rises and falls of climate on the planet were noted. And then all of a sudden there was a moment where it leveled out greatly compared to the past. And I find that absolutely fascinating, considering that our stories speak of the gods taking mantle over creation by slaying Ymir. Alvis speaks, and he doesn't even skip a step. Because Lord Thor just says to him, you're going against my will if you want to get the blessing of me. It's not going to happen. And he kind of sidesteps it and just immediately in his assuredness says in 7, thy good will now shall I get quickly. And win that marriage word, I long to have and would not lack this snow white maid for mine. So circumventing any objection with absolute assuredness, and he says, I will have this snow white, this miaulchita is the word used. And again, this is another point of beauty that is emphasized in our stories. We talked about the pale arms, we talked about the shining, whether it be by gold or by hair. And then again, the fairness of skin is a huge factor towards the exemplification of beauty in our stories. And I know that sometimes, like Alzhirago, they will say, these are our folk gods, and people will try to rebuttal, how can you prove that? And here we are talking about one of the gods, one of the Halsinir, Thor's daughter Thruth. And it's mentioned with Freya, it's mentioned with Frigg. So continuously over and over and over again, it's kind of reemphasized what they're speaking of. And Thor speaks in 8, the love of the maid I may not keep thee from winning, though guest so wise, if of every world that thou canst tell me all, that now I wish to know. So now this is the part where he lays the gauntlet down, if you will. He knows that the cock assuredness of this, damnable little thing is so greedy, so hungry, that he's like, oh, well, I'll just bait him into this and see how much he knows. And he knows he's going to take it. So with number 9, he kind of continues, answer me, Alvis, thou knowest all, dwarf of the doom of men. What call thy the earth that lies before all in each and every world? So at this point, he starts to talk about the realms of Yggdrasil, or the great tree. He's asking what things are called, and this is part of that poetic vocabulary to create a bigger vernacular for the poet. And so it's stated by Alvis, each of these, in order for the poet to kind of have a lot to pull from. So Yarth, earth, it is to men. To the gods, it is the ways. It is called, to the earth, earth to men. Field, to the gods, it is. The ways, it is called by the Wanes, or the Vanir, if people aren't familiar with the Wanes. Evergreen by the giants, the grower by the elves, the moist by the holy ones high. Couple of things about this one. Obviously, earth is a given. Yarth. The field. It's worth noting that the idea of the middle world being a field, whether it's a field of battle, it again is, or what I have always taken it as is that the souls of mankind are it's a field in which we are cultivating our souls, the souls that sift up to the top to become the cream of the crop, if you will, are the ones that are brought in order to aid the gods against chaos and evil. And that is predominant of the purpose, is the processes to create that. And so harvesting from the field is one thing that I've always taken. The ways, it is called by the wains. So Veya is what they say in Old Norse. Very, very simple. It just, Kalaveya Vanir. It is the expanse, the traveling place. Evergreen by the Jotuns, of course. And then with the Alvar, the growers or the grower. And that, I think, is important to understand, that the Alvar in specifics were seen as the ones that began the growing seasons. When Lord Frey returns to his bride after Ostra, or after Sigrblot, he returns, and his retinue of elves, who he is the lord of, begin their works from there. So it's the imagery of Lord or of the Holy Frey, walking with the Alvar, kind of moving through. And of course, these Alvar are, Lios Alvar and nature Alvar, not necessarily Doc Alvar, which are connected to the mortal coil, or were. The moist by the Holy Ones high. The only thing is that I don't know if he's speaking of his own kin as being that and giving homage to them, or if he is speaking of the gods again. The other is that he may be making a joke in saying that the ones at the lowest, the souls that are in waiting for it to be drawn up by Yggdrasil, are they are the lowest but the highest at the same time. But there's not a lot to be spoken of here, and I really think more or less it was just a repeat, because the word that's used is, he says kalla aur upreyen. Upreyen means the upper regents, or the upper rex, the upper ones who dictate and control. And I think that more than likely this is just a re-reference to the Aesir. Let's see. Thor speaks again in 11. He says, "Answer me this, Alvis, thou knowest all, dwarf of the doom of men. What call they the heaven, beheld of the High One, in each and every world?" And Alvis speaks in 12. And it's also worth noting that, again, a lot of folks get in their minds that the Aesir are somehow a completely different race from the Jotun or from the Vanir, and that is not the case. In this framework, it's understanding that each of the worlds is, in essence, connected to its people. So the Jotnar are different from the gods because they are from a different place. And even though they have great connections, one is living in one place and the other is living in another. And that's what makes them, in essence, different races. But the gods are not of that. They're not separate from the Jotnar. And in a lot of ways, they're not separate from the Vanir anymore. But each of these worlds are synonymous with a body of people. And this is the one that I really like because I've talked to a couple of people about this. In 12, heaven, men call it. The word heaven is not an Aramaic word. It is not a Hebrew word. It is not even a Latin word. I'm lost on the actual word that they use. Enumena, I believe, but don't quote me on that. But no, the word heaven is ours. So to speak about heaven, to talk about the gods in heaven, I have had many Asatru because they still have the kind of vilified, they're in the negative thinking about Christianity. They're like, why are you calling it heaven? We should call it Ausgarth. No, Ausgarth is in heaven, and heaven is the shining expanse. It's the place above. And the word is there, and you see it again with Heimdallr and his living in Himmenbjörk, the mountains that surround Ausgarth. So they are mountains in heaven that specifically surround Idavol, where the gods built their kingdom. So heaven men call it the height, the gods, the wains, the weaver of winds, the giants, the upworld, the elves, the fair roof, the dwarves, the dripping hall. And that, I think, is, very good in the sense that it's kind of a clever usage, because if you are the ones that live under and you live in a place where you're not only able to see the sun, the Svartalfar are always associated with not being able to see the daylight. And the cavern is a dripping wall, or the dripping ceiling of a cavern, but yet still the same in the upper realm where the rain falls. So it is the dripping hall as well. And Thor speaks in 13. Answer me, Alvis, thou knowest all, dwarf of the doom of men. What call thy the moon that men behold in each and every world? Now we're getting into the interesting part that I wanted to bring up. But let's read his response. Alvis speaks in 14, and he says, moon with men, flame the gods among, the wheel in the house of hell, the goer, the giants, the gleamer, the dwarves, the elves, the teller of time. So most importantly, it's worth remembering that cosmologically, our ancestors felt that the middle world was a skein, a place in which in the center and above, upon mountains and beyond the clouds, is where the gods reside, in heaven. And in heaven, there is a tree, and there is Ausgarður. And that the roots of the tree go into the mountains and come out in different areas. A lot of people see Yggdrasil compartmentalized because of modern interpretations and some I would even argue just kind of ridiculous, or I don't like to use the word blasphemous, but I mean, they're right in there, changing things and making things relatively ridiculous. But our ancestors would have seen the middle world, and that they know that the gods are somewhere in the center and they're connected to our world. And I think that this speaks a great amount about more of the spiritual connectedness that our ancestors had towards the gods. And they felt that on this skein of earth, they were connected. So a lot of folks don't know how to wrap their head around that when they think of the Axis Mundi, or when they think of Yggdrasil as being in the center of the world, but they need to have it run through the world, and they need to have the roots at the bottom and the gods at the top of the tippy top of the tree. And I don't think that at all. And this is one of the reasons. The sun and the moon are going to be referenced in this story as being known of and moving through the worlds. Now we do know, of course, that the worlds are symbolic. The gods are above. They are in the heavenly place, but that place is not a range of mountains. And the Jotuns are not, if I drive east, that's where I'm going to find them. They are just in that land, hearkening back to the dawn of creation. These directions have symbolic meaning. But they saw the sun and the moon passing over all of these realms. So as the sun rises in the east, it would go over that central place, that mountain place where heaven is placed upon it, and that the gods would experience the same sun that we did. So that is one of the reasons why I think it is not good for folks to change cosmology around in order to kind of cram it into a box that they need, because they're ultimately looking at the way our ancestors saw cosmology wrong. Again, if they were honest and said, this is just how we spiritually look at it, perhaps that would have, a less sense. But at the end of the day, our ancestors and the way that they experienced their relationship with the gods is very much in line with other Aryan groups, other European Aryan tribal groups. I mean, the idea of the mountain or a mountain range or a place in which the tree is. And you kind of see that with like Tolkien and his idea of the tree in the center of the kingdom, as a representation of its interconnectedness to all that is below it. Last but not least, too, the idea of the teller of time, utilizing the moon for time telling, is long and deep standing tradition amongst our folk. I don't think that it was as uniform as a lot of people would like it to be. Most people will immediately talk about the Anglo-Saxons and their lunar calendar, but most of the evidence that we find in the north is that there was a solar lunar calendar, and that the lunar calendar was keeping more track of when to plant, when to go out, and when to come back from raiding and trading and all of these things. So, like, as a matter of fact, tonight on the Iron Mark calendar is the Hunter's Moon, which fits perfectly with the fact that we are going into winter finding Uller's bloat and honoring him. So, yeah, I won't bore people too much with calendar talk, but okay. Alvis then speaks, or he says, the tellers of time, excuse me. And Thor speaks again. Answer me, Alvis, thou knowest all, dwarf of the doom of men. What call they the sun that all men see in each and every world? So again, emphasizing that the machinations of the Himmelwärter, the heavenly wardens, as they move through their designated paths, is experienced by all of the worlds. And that's why sometimes we talk about how the worlds of Yggdrasil can be compartmentalized, can be separated in order to be examined, but ultimately are almost as if they would, I'm not saying parallel, but overlapping, and that there is a great distance, but no distance at all between. That the gods who are above have abilities to see and to work within our world, whether it's through the will of Urður, or whether it's through listening through the Heimdallr's eyes and ears. He's half stepping into the heavenly realm and half stepping into the earthly realm. The gods are deeply connected to the middle world. They are not so distant that they can't be understood or recognized. They have a relationship with us, and they work around us so much, but we sometimes don't know, or we don't see it, or more often than not, most of the folk who don't know about the gods don't know how to place name upon the divine that's working around them. And again, it goes the same with the Jotnar and the Vanir, and so very, very interconnected. So in 16, the next page, Alvis speaks. He says, men call it the sun. And it's worth noting, most folks think of Suna, but it is, by the Old Norse, is sol, sharing its commonality and roots with other Aryan language groups. The gods, orb of the sun, the deceiver of Dvalin, the dwarves, the giants, ever bright, elves, the fair wheel, all glowing, the sons of the gods. So it is worth noting that when we speak about the Himmelwärter, they are not the gods of, but instead they preside over the elemental force. The sun is a spark from Muspel, and Sol or Suna is given stead over that, carrying the shield to keep it from burning the world, carrying the bellows to cool it so that it does not overburn. And again, that's some interesting things with scientific studies about how there are electromagnetic shields in a kind of protecting us from a lot of the sun's rays. I find that super interesting where they become synchronistic. But the primordial energy of creation is wild, and it is brought under the yoke of the gods. It's given pathway, it's given rotation, and it's given an ability to create life. And that's the difference. The cyclical nature of the way that we view creation is not that there is nothing and then there is something, but that there is fire and there is matter, or there is fire and there is ice. And that fire and that ice give way to release great primordial powers. And there are beings who wish to wield that power in order to either advance their own wills or to, again, create the ebb and flow of chaos And then there are the gods who seek to maintain it and keep it on its path for as long as they are able to hold true to that order. So hence the orb of the sun. It is the providence in which she has. Deceiver of Dvalin is interesting because that's also kind of foreshadowing a little bit in the story. Dvalin, of course, is a Dvergar, and he, he's not able to live in the light of the sun. And in Fafnismal, he, is again emphasized that he turns to stone. And this was a common understanding amongst our ancestors that the Dvergar or the Svart Alfar, the swarthy elves, as they were called, that lived in the earth could not be graced by the sun. And this still survives today in Iceland with many of the stone structures saying that they are, generally they will say they're giants. This is where a giant was, and he got touched by the sun. There's even one where there's a giant and his horse. But more likely it's lending to the Dvergar or swarthy elves. So then he speaks in 17, Thor. Answer me, Alvis, thou knowest all, dwarf of the doom of men. What callest they the clouds that keep the rains in each and every world? And Alvis speaks in return, in 18. Clouds, men name them. Rain hope, gods call them. The Wains call them kites of the wind. Water hope, the giants, again lending to the idea of flooding. Weather might, the elves, and helmet of secrets in hell. So when we speak of the Jotnar having their inclination to create chaos in the middle world through one aspect, it's not just the only aspect. We don't simply think that the Jotnar are working through physical states of vegetative or material. That's one of the ways. But they're the water hope, the idea of the deluge, as a force for them to be able to utilize. So the tidal wave, the tornado, the hurricane are seen as instruments, and that it is Lord Thor who's attempting to stave all of these implementations off. And Thor speaks in 19. Answer me, Alvis, thou knowest all, dwarf of the doom of men. What call thy the wind, the widest fares in each and every world? And Alvis speaks in 20. Wind do men call it. The gods call it waverer. The nayer, the holy ones high. The wailer, the giants. Roaring wender, the elves. In hell, the blustering blast. I think it's very interesting to look at the wailer or the crying out, but roaring wender, the word wend isn't really used in English anymore, and it means that which travels or goes about, oftentimes turning or curving. So it's the one that travels to and fro while roaring. Let me see. We're going to 21. Thor speaks. Answer me, Alvis, thou knowest all, dwarf of the doom of men. What call they the calm that quiet lies in each and every world? And Alvis speaks in return, calm, men call it. The quiet, the gods, the wanes, the hush of the winds, the sultry, the giants, the elves, day's stillness, and the dwarves, the shelter of day. Again, this is an interesting part because they're speaking about the negative. They're speaking about the opposite of all the movement. There is the stillness of movement that's also given credence to. And I think this really does it's more or less reflects a seafaring race. Being out on the ocean, I've been out on the ocean many times on large vessels and small vessels. And yes, there is this moment where everything is still, the water is glass, and it's abnormal. It becomes just very noticeable amongst the cacophonous noise of the wind in the ocean, constantly barraging you. And so I think that this again lends to why they mention this, is because every now and then you have no wind in your sail, and there's just this great stillness that falls upon the world. And Thor speaks in 23. Answer me, Alvis, thou knowest all, dwarf of the doom of men. What call they the sea whereon men sail in each and every world? So again, there is referencing, I think there's the connection point. Speaking of seafaring. Alvis speaks. Sea men call it. And that's interesting. A lot of people don't know the Old Norse word is sai or sair for the sea. So our languages are, for a lot of words are very, very close to each other. The gods, the smooth lying or smooth laying, the wave is it called by the wains, eel home by the giants, drink stuff the elves, for the dwarves its name is the deep. The Lagerstav is what the elves call it, Lagerstav, and or Lagerstaff, and again, the watery stuff, or I wouldn't even say it's stuff. It's this is one of those words that hasn't been translated well, and the other options that you have don't really kind of fit to this, but the idea of the water, and I think that it has more of an importance because the Alvar are the progenitors of growth. So the idea of what they do in creating nature and creating that blooming of spring and of summer is first and foremost starts with the evaporation of water. And so I think it's quite fitting if you think about it. I always liked eel home as well. Just the place of writhing, slimy beasts is the way the Jotnar, speak of it. And Thor speaks in 25. Answer me, Alvis, thou knowest all, dwarf of the doom of men. What call they the fire, the flames for men in each of the worlds? And again, we're speaking here with an understanding that our ancestors viewed the holy gods as holding dominion over many aspects of the primordial. They have come in and created space and given order and hierarchy to the chaos, and in that order and hierarchy, they bring in elements from the primordial in order to control it. I know Alzhiragodi has talked about that. When people go too far on the concept that we are a nature religion, when in reality we are seeking to live not strictly in like symbiosis with nature, but that we create our own environments. Now, it makes perfect sense not to destroy the things that you need in order to create safety, but that we are not simply, laying to the wayside and saying, no, I don't want to put a roof over my family's head because I don't want to cut down the trees. And anybody that knows history, the Norse folk and the Europeans or the Germanic Europeans had an overabundance of wood and used it often as a, to help and to create order for their lives. So in 26, elder heiter med monum. Elder is the word for fire. Fire men call it, and flame the gods. By the wanes, is it wildfire? And again, this is emphasizing the nature of the Vanir, how they are diametrically opposite of the Jotnar. They are bringing in life and taking out death. And one of the biggest kind of aspects of this is you can see it's lending towards the idea that the wildfire, that which kills and burns down nature. Now, it's not always bad, but the Vanir being in the middle world with us would see that aspect. The biter by giants, the burner by dwarves, the swift in the house of hell. And again, I don't know why he used the double L, hell, but the land of the dead, the place of death, and also to, again, anybody who's been following VNS, it's the place away from time, the transitional point for the soul and components of the soul to move back up through and be disseminated back out by the gods into the realms. So 27, answer me, Alvis, thou knowest all, dwarf of the doom of men. What call they the wood that grows for mankind in each and every world? And again, my referencing to the usage of trees for the sake of creating. It's for mankind. And Alvis speaks. Men call it the wood, the viður. Gods, the mane of the field. Seaweed of the hills in hell. Flame food the giants, and fair-limbed the elves. The wand is it called by the wanes. So again, re-emphasizing usage, but bear in mind as well, this is for the poet to use kennings. But I do, again, find it absolutely, interesting. The fair-limbed versus flame food. And that's, again, re-emphasizing primordial destruction versus natural law and its cyclic nature, or at least its attempt to achieve the zenith of perfect placement. And so there's, again, resistance and natural law constantly fighting in the center world. And I bring this up in almost every class at Thorshof, and why it is so imperative that Jotunheim and Vanaheim are in the middle. They're not down in the lower world, or they're not off in these little bubbles that some people draw. No, that their opposites are important because they play out here in the middle world. And Thor speaks in 29. Answer me, Alvis, thou knowest all, dwarf of the doom of men. What call thy the night, the daughter of Nor, in each and every world? And Alvis speaks, night, men call it. Darkness, gods name it. The hood, the holy ones high. The giants, the lightless. The elves, sleep's joy. The dwarves, the weaver of dreams. So this is interesting, and obviously the Himmelwärter thus far have not been mentioned as being gendered. They're seen strictly as just in their primordial sense. But, later on, they are listed clearly as having, willful soul and gender. And Not is of the night. Some people have tried to classify her as being Ostra, that somehow she is also the dawn. And I think that's extremely misleading. And I think that's, again, pushing too far because of the connection to her and the darkness. However, perhaps as time went on, as the stories went on, their loss of the Himmelwärter in their entirety, because you very rarely see, like, the mentioning will be of, like, say, Sol and Mauni, but not Deir and Not. And then sometimes, or very rarely, Dellinger will be mentioned. And certainly in the Old Norse, Ostra is not mentioned. The name survives to be of the East, but the function kind of gets smoothed away. And I think that especially by the 12th century, there was so much lost. So Thor speaks, and he says again, and remember, that's the anchor point I was talking about earlier. He says, answer me, Alvis, thou knowest all, dwarf of doom of men. What call they the seed that is sown by men in each and every world? So men call it grain, and corn the gods. Growth in the world of the wains, eaten by the giants, drink stuff by the elves, and in hell the slender stem. And I think this is a really great part to kind of bring up. One, the word corn, I know we associate it specifically with the corn vegetable, the grass that we grow. But the word corn, like with John, barley corn, it meant a seed. It meant a grain. It didn't matter if it was barley or, different types of like rye corn or what have you. But the fact that we've named corn as in like Nebraska corn has kind of thrown those things off. The eaten by the giants and the drink stuff, and again the referencing to Laugastad, the same as the ocean here, but this one really sticks true with, of course, the usage of grain to create sacred alcohol. And I also like to let in Helgard, the slender stem, the remembrance of life itself is fragile. Thor speaks in 33. Answer me, Alvis, thou knowest all, dwarf of the doom of men. What call they the ale that is quaffed of men in each and every world? And Alvis speaks, it is ale among men. It is beer the gods among. So that if you're looking over at the Old Norse, the word ol, the O-L with the umlauts on top of it, ol is ale, and björ, B-J-O-R-R, björ is the amongst the gods. So a lot of folks too get caught up on the idea that we have to drink mead and we have to drink out of a horn. But our ancestors drank out of chalices. They drank out of cups. They didn't always drink mead. Mead has become more of a cultural thing in Asatru in modern age, which I think is fine. But it was not always the case, and its availability was very seasonal. In the world of the wains, the foaming, bright draft with the giants. Most people will read that as bright draught, but it is also pronounced bright draft. Mead with dwellers in hell. The feast draught with Suttung Sun. Two things there. The fact that it's clearly speaking of celebratory nature in the land of the dead. Snorri speaks of the transition between life and death as being gloomy, as being, again, a judgment of your doom. You are marked by the gods, and your ancestors can either accept you or deny you. And it is, again, a house of all the calamity of man. But once you pass through that, you are in the dwelling where the mead and celebration when you enter with your ancestral lines. And then this is also, I think, one of the only mentions where they bring up about Suttung's sons, which of course is speaking of the primordial Jotnar. Most people, when they think of Jotnar, they think of only the middle world, and they only think of Jotunheim, and they fail to realize that that's the descendancy of Ymir, but that there were Jotnar before them, before even Ymir. The first Aesir, the first Aus, Buri, lives amongst the Jotnar of primordial matter, while Ymir is still, in his early forms. So Thor speaks, in a single breast, I have never seen more wealth of wisdom old. But with treacherous wiles must I now betray thee. The day has caught thee, dwarf. Now the sun shines here in the hall. So at this point, that leaves us to the common knowledge that the audience would have, that Lord Thor has been having him run his knowledge and constantly baiting him with questions, but the reasoning for it wasn't to get to know what he knows or to challenge him in any way. It was to get him to talk so that the dawn could come and turn him to stone and make him no longer a problem, thus showing the wisdom and the cunning that Lord Thor, who is not often, shown in this light, shows that.
So, Nick, can you post the image for today's show advertising it?
Oh, yeah, where he looks kind of like Humpty Dumpty.
That's why I chose this for the image of the show, because it entertains me.
Yeah, I saw that when I was looking at on the YouTube.
There he is, the midget turned to stone.
Yeah.
And his head's all egg-shaped and funny looking, and I found this this picture particularly humorous. Thank you, Nick, for indulging me.
It's going to be a great doorstop.
There you go. And I talk a lot about one of the things that we run into often, especially with newer people, is Thor equals angry strength, Odin equals wisdom, Njord equals sea. Our gods are complete personalities that have multi-layer and dimension. Yes, Thor's outstanding characteristics are fury and might and laying waste with his hammer. But there's much more to him than that. When matching wisdom, a god does not have to be the foremost god of wisdom to be leagues beyond you and I in wisdom. And I think that's really important to know. The weakest of our gods is infinitely stronger than the strongest of men. Thor isn't just strong and just able to defeat foes with his hammer. This poem in specific is really well done in its, demonstration of his mental abilities, of his cleverness, of his ability to, trick someone, and not just rando dwarf, but the dwarf that got the name All-Wise.
All-Wise.
He turned the dwarf's wisdom into his comeuppance in this, which I think in and of itself is really kind of a cool, mic drop on it. So we got a number of questions, and I did a little bit of investigation into this first one because I wanted to know what folks were talking about. So the first one, Ryan O'Ryan asks, I made a vid called Who Did the Gods Call, which honors many leaders of folkish groups, including Mr. McNalland and you both. However, a viewer sent me a vid attacking the AFA, showing a text from Mrs. McNalland saying, Jews are allowed in Asatru. Can you address this? Yeah, I can. And I looked at that video in question. And the video, so I will absolutely address the quote directly, but video in question is, I think you could see fairly that it is by a very unpleasant person who is too cowardly to use their actual identity and also seemingly allergic to any kind of success in life. There's a very toxic trait amongst our folk to burn down any possible opportunity to ever be more successful than we are and to moth to a flame on just infighting and nonsense. There's a lot of that in there. But I think it's funny because he is the silent, the silent folkish majority with 43 followers of a video he made 3 years ago. So I think that's kind of silly. I don't know exactly when the quote was from, but someone has brought the quote to my attention years ago. So I know it is an older quote, and it may even have been the same person who brought it to my attention. It was certainly something really ill-advised for Sheila to have expressed in the way she did. And I think that it's, if you were to get all of everybody's text messages or emails or whatever, you're going to find people saying dumb stuff that probably would have phrased different. I think that you could find an abundance of that on everybody. But I understand the disturbance in the quote. And the quote was something to the effect of a guy reached out and said that he thought he had some Jewish ancestry, and Sheila like, no, that's okay. You can join anyway. there's more to that story, but I want to address it head on because that's kind of what I vowed to do here on Victory Never Sleeps. The point of that, as best as I can ascertain, and I have no idea when Sheila wrote that, that's not something that I would have said or expressed, but it is what it is. I think the point of that was, yeah, if this guy had somebody who had some Jewish connection way deep in his ancestry, that wasn't the defining issue. And I think that as uncomfortable or not good of a soundbite as that might be, it's worth noting there's a lot of people who are 100% of European heritage that converted to Judaism in Eastern Europe over the centuries. That's unfortunate. Wish that weren't the case. But I think to say that anyone who happens to have been of a Jewish religion anywhere in the course of your DNA, that's a pretty high standard. That's something that, being honest, the AFA standard has always been and continues to be, if you look white, if you identify as white, you're white. It is what it is. And we can tell the difference. If you come here with the big, with Semitic features and the Jerry Seinfeld nose and stuff, and shalom, my name's Shmuley Meckelstein, then that's probably a no. That's probably a hard no, because that's something that's an active part of your identity and something you identify as racially, and not something that one of your ancestors may have identified as religiously. But again, as I've said many times, we don't bust out the skull calipers. What we also don't do is welcome in Jewish members or think that's cool. That's not the AFA's position, never has been. If you were advertising yourself as, hi, I'm Jewish, can I join the AFA? Certainly not. That's not appropriate as a religious choice, because we're Asatru in your foreign religion. If you say, hi, I am Semitic, can I join the AFA? No, of course not. We are an ethnic faith. I think it was an attempt by Sheila to allay concerns by somebody that got with the skull caliper crowd and was scared they can't possibly fit in because a third great grandparent might have had a Jewish surname. And again, that's unfortunate, but I think if everybody's ancestry was laid bare, you'd have, uncomfortable instances in a lot of people's family trees. We are not, as I've said, we're not trying to force 100%. I don't think that's a realistic thing. What we are trying to do is get people who look white, are white, identify as white, and are white people. And that is our standard, has always been our standard. Wish I knew context of the quote or when it was from, but that's not the current position of the Asatru Folk Assembly. It's not anything that I've, expressed or think is the case. It was worded extremely poorly. But I'd be happy to answer any additional questions on that or on any of the content of that video, because it's kind of ridiculous. As some follow-up over here on the side, he follows up with, maybe she didn't want to be harassed by the ADL. I don't think it was the ADL specifically she didn't want to be harassed by, but that was, and again, I'm making assumptions about the quote. The quote was at least 3 years old because that was in the video, but I believe that quote might have been before I became Alvissmal. If that's the case, and it was during Steve's administration, that was at a time where the AFA was really trying to navigate the growing tide of political correctness. And something that was really, really important to me and always has been since I became Alvissmal was to clarify those points in ways that were not misleading. There was a time where folks were very uncomfortable saying anything that might hurt us, might get us in trouble, might cause, any of the social consequence that, you know, having people call you racist brings. I am much more concerned that we are explicit and honest in our viewpoint and our stances than fearful of that particular labeling or social consequence. And that's a choice that I made as Alzheimer Gothi that I stand by. Different people, you know, were a little bit more concerned about those things. And I think it's certainly, I can understand somebody wanting to make sure they didn't say anything that hurt the AFA's reputation. I think inadvertently it hurts the AFA's reputation in a different way. Okay. And it turns out that was a very old quote during, I say very old. It depends on how old you are, or how old very old means. If it was during Steve's time, which the guy who asked the question, Ryan Orion, says, that would have been pre-2016. And we have definitely tightened up to make sure we are very clear on our positions since then. And that's been very important to me to do so. But like I said, I think we all have put things in ways we wouldn't have put it if we would have had time to think about it and given it a second thought. But that's certainly one of those instances. Okay, so in checking out that video, a point that was raised is another question or point of interest. The guy in the video got real mad. He got big mad that Steve talked about getting a 501c3 because that was cowardly. It was cowardice and purposely done so that we couldn't fight or comment on racial politics. That's silly. A lot of that video was, Steve wants to raise money. How ridiculous. That's how we're able to have Hoffs and do anything. Guy in the video also made, you know, Steve is purposely holding back anyone in Asatru in America from getting Hoffs. How? There was nobody else that even made an effort. Literally, the first person in America to get us a Hoff was Stephen McNowan. You can say what you want, but that is the truth. Any kind of recognizable public religious building, that's absolutely the truth. And to say anything else is just dishonest. And we have the old trope of anybody who's more successful than me is a Fed or a Jew.
That's working with the Mexican cartel.
Well, that's what I meant when I said the allergy to success. There's a certain number of people out there that any possibility, if you even dare to raise your head above the rim of the bucket to be somewhat successful at something, it has to be a nefarious plot from, you know, insert whatever conspiracy you want there. Either it's Jewish or it's a federal op or we're run by the cartels or, you know, there's Rothschilds or I'm a lizard person. I've heard this lately. It's never, man, somebody, you know, an old man spent his entire adult life building something and committed to something and we're reaping some degree of success because of it. That doesn't even enter in. Or perhaps in doing so, he won the favor of our gods and they've blessed us with some success. That's not even fathomable. It's always got to be some sinister hand out there. And that's a really depressing way to think. And it's anathema to any kind of victory in life. And I hope that our people can break free of that. And we're doing the very best we can to break our people out of that mindset because it's toxic. And in a lot of cases, it's deadly. Depression and a feeling of helplessness and can't possibly win in this world is literally killing our folk. And it's often a slow death. It's also often one by one, especially of our young men, but it's literally deadly to us. And I want that to stop. And one of the big hopes in the AFA, and this is so Nick, I know what I do want to talk about next week. I know that I didn't figure it out earlier today because I was trying to put it in, figure out the sexy tagline for it and a cool picture for it and how we want to phrase it. But that's kind of what I want to talk about next week, and I'll let you know who the host will be. But I want to talk about the golden age that we are building within the husk of the wolf age around us and what that looks like. Because keeping our eyes on that prize and our focus on success is extremely important. And so that's what we're going to talk about next week. And I'm not sure who will be joining me for it, but I hope that everyone in this audience will join me for it because I think it'll be a good thing to discuss. And I'm looking forward to that. All right. A question from Sowilo Yera. Do you think our Alfar and Disir reside in both Hell and Loselfheim? Svan.
So, when you're talking about the Alvar, obviously, certain Alvar are living in Loselfheim, but I think what you're really talking about is what is commonly called Dark Alvar, dark elves, especially because you're connecting it with Disir. The reasoning behind the nomenclature dark elves, as opposed to swarthy or light, is that dark elves are, again, shades of the mortal that have been given providence over the bloodlines or over a land. And the Alvar being connected to battle sites, being connected to burial mounds, being connected to significant land sites is kind of, again, lending to the fact that Darkalv are not in Leosalfheim or in Helgard. Did they pass through Helgard? Yes. Were they taken up? Yes. Were they given position to do things in the middle world again? Yes. It's the same with the Disir. We speak about the Disir as holding providence over the bloodlines of our people. And this is a great and sacred honor. And we can hope that a matron of our family is a Disir. And in that, it's the ascension, the being placed into the middle world and being presided over the blood. Imagine it as like our ancestors are in that place, in the place of our ancestors where they are gathered. But Disir are often, and I think even by non-Asatru, they're often confused with like guardian angels, if you will. And we see this in the lore, and I'm not trying to pull too much from the lore because, again, I think that all too often we think like, oh, if it's not in the lore, but we see a couple of things that I bring in is that every time that the Disir or the Alvar, specifically the Dark Alvar, the ones that have lived, they are in a mound. They are on the earth. They're someone sees them or has a dream about them coming to the house and experiencing. Now, I don't know too much. I mean, I think somebody could argue the Disir are in the realm beyond. They're beyond the veil. But again, I believe that the Disir have an ability to kind of place their hand upon the living. I think that they are far more than just being beyond the veil, that they reside. I had an experience with a Save Corner that spoke of my grandparents being directly behind me when she spoke of them and describing them. And to be honest, I thought that she was completely, being false. And then talking to my mother about the description, and then she shows me pictures that fit the description. And I was like, Ooh. So the Alvar and the Disir, I believe, are the connection here in the middle world. But if you're talking about Leosalvar are spirits of nature. I believe they're along with the Holy Frey. The reasoning behind the kennings that were said in the story tonight is about the fedunctity and the great fertility of nature, and those Alvar are of the upper realm and of light and of life, and then the Dvergar or Svart Alvar are of the material. So, I mean, to answer your question flatly, no, I do not believe they are in Leosalfheim or Helgard. I believe they are here with us and they are attached to things. Their weird has been woven by the gods to things, either bloodline or sacred places. But Alvar are hard to pin down.
So I don't believe that they are stuck somewhere. And I don't think that makes logical sense. So if we believe that our ancestors interact with us or can interact with us here in Midgard, but we also believe they're in Helheim, then clearly they can be in both of those places. If they are ascended to being Alfar and being at some kind of a higher level of existence after death, perhaps they can go to all three of those places. Maybe if they're exalted, ascended heroes that get to feast with the gods, they can be in Ausgard and Helheim. And maybe they can. Trouble is, that's an amazing thing for us to find out when we're on the other side of the veil. But I think it doesn't quite work as our understanding of space and dimensionality, I think, works really different in the world that we live in than in the world that those who pass beyond the veil occupy. And I think that, our gods can interact with us and be here in Midgard. They certainly reside in Ausgard, but Thor travels to Jotunheim. Our gods can travel to Vanaheim. They can, on special occasion, journey to Helheim. The idea that there's this firm line between all of those places, I think, becomes less and less the more ascended of a being you are. And the ability to travel between worlds becomes less, so much that the Allfather can travel freely between all worlds because of his ability to do so. But even then, the journey into Helheim isn't a thing that gets done. It's like you send a special person on a special mission to go there, and that's abnormal.
Yeah, it's not just all the gods on a Tuesday.
Yeah, it's not so. Well, what the hell, guys? Can I pick you up anything?
Yeah, we gotta hold the meeting.
And that's the thing. The further from where you're supposed to be, the harder the transit, I think, in a way as well. But a lot of this is speculation. I don't feel that our ancestors are trapped. We believe that, as I said, we believe that our DC are with us here in Midgard, but certainly also they commune with the rest of our ancestors in Helheim. The dead pass through Helheim regardless. Or most of them do. So I think that that's kind of, we get speculative at that point, but I don't think there's as firm of lines as you may have in your head about that on the other side, but we'll see. I have a question for Witan Svan. If you have time later, do you have sketches or ideas of the appearance of the other gods and goddesses? Or does it come to you when you find the spot for it?
I definitely have sketches. it's an evolutionary process to try to create. There's a sense again of being inspired, pulling ideas from all over and then trying to formulate them, and then trying to attain the perfect balance between a relatable sense to our adult folk and to our children. I think that my goal when drawing or an effigy of the gods is to make the adults feel, wow, that's really nice, or that's beautiful, or it just kind of again a reflection of the way that we express our connection to the divine. But I also want our children to be like, wow, that's really, the bright colors. And again, too, because we're not, our ancestors weren't drab. So the usage of bright colors, the usage of royalty, of and a sense of, I'm not saying it's equating to, because certainly the time period stuff that is drawn isn't the same, but like a majesty to it, not directly Arthurian, but there's a majesty to the gods as they live in their realm in the heavens. That is, I think that I like to shoot for. I really don't. I find a place like with, say, Lord Odin in his wayfaring sense, but there's also needs to be a sense of a majesty to the gods. There is a book, I believe it's the author's last name is Kiri, and it's called Old Norse Myths, and it's actually two sisters that wrote the book, but the way they capture the majesty of the gods is kind of what I lean towards in some of my inspiration for that. So what the other thing is maintaining consistency. Thor in Thorshof will look like Thor in other imagery and pictures. Another, again, the consistency of the sun and rod as a symbol of divinity around the head of the Aus and the Ausinir. So as far as like giving out sketches and stuff, I'm still working on a lot of things, so I don't want to do that. But they, like currently right now, I'm attempting to finish up an image of Njordr, Lord of the Seas, but also like I worked on some of the Hellion, the heroes, the holy ones, and so that's hard too, especially when you have like no historical reference to go on. So I mean, like just a perfect example is Rod the Strong. He was slain by eating a venomous snake because Olafur Tryggvason put it down his gullet. And so the imagery that is in that picture is him stepping on a serpent and clearly saying that, beware of the ones who claim to be sinless, because they're often the serpents.
So fun. Well, okay, first, as far as the images of the gods go, it's funny because something Svan and I talk about during the creative process, and I always look forward to that on different things. And Svan is a really amazing artist. And I mean that in the truest sense of the word, because it's not just about like the ability to recreate realism, but like he's able to imbue his piety into the works that he does, which is really cool. But he and I often have to go back and forth on like physique, because I prefer a more swole Odin than Svan prefers. So we gotta do a little bit of horse trading on that. But no, it's really kind of it's a special process that I feel really blessed I'm able to, I don't know, be part of, is going back and forth with him on the creative process when he does the murals, because it's really a special thing. So we're waiting. Good things come to those who wait, and you can't rush genius. So as we wait on some of this artwork that we need, you guys may be entertained by Nick and my hand at some artwork, because when we need art for our Halo or our Holy Asatru heroes on our website, we've been going through and I've been finding images to doctor up and make fitting for them in the meantime. And Nick has been helping me alter those in the digital space and put background and such to them where we don't have photographs. And while we await Svan's skilled artistry to bring them to life in a more original way. But it's entertaining, and we work on a number of those, and Nick's been a big help on those. So, I feel like I didn't skip a question. Here's the question. Go ahead, Svan.
I was going to say, just to let everybody know, too, the divinity is always a sun and rod of gold, and mortality is always a sun and rod of red. Just to give people that clarification. And that the sun and rod with its 12 spokes is speaking about cosmic order and being connected to it.
Absolutely. So the next question then is, do y'all think maybe the Aesir were space travelers? My gut tells me we originally came off this world, Earth. The tales of cosmic milk that feed Bursla, stuff like that. Svan, are the Aesir spacefarers?
No, I don't believe the gods in that way. I believe that the gods are divine, that they have spiritual form first, and that is their form. They, to manifest physically, I believe it's possible for them. And I don't think it happens often. And I am not one to say why, but I believe that the gods are interconnected to us through the well of Erdr, and that all of the gods, when they gather to council, are not just marking the fates of men, but are also interacting with all of the elements that create time. And so, in essence, the gods are able to project time from themselves, and as we perceive it, as we perhaps gain insight or gain a sense of being messaged by the gods are so woven into fate and time as it descends from them down into the middle world from that upper well, that is a large portion of that interaction. Whereas, like we spoke earlier, Lord Thor, in his interaction of going, and the kind of the shape of the hammer, the handle going up and down and to the sides, his catalytic nature is, I think, seems to be more prevalent or dynamic in the thought of our ancestors and in the stories. And of course, Lord Odin, who is the dynamic god of the tripartite, is able to go everywhere. I think that to see them as physical space travelers, that opens up a lot of questions that go against my beliefs. If they are spiritual space travelers, physical beings, is there a limit on their time? Is it a limit on their age? Is the story of the golden apples, some allegory for like eternal space food or what have you? I just, it doesn't fit with me, because I believe that the gods are divine.
So Svan is very nice, man. Yeah, no, it's not a matter of belief. The gods are gods. You may believe differently. If you do, you are wrong. The gods are gods. They do God things. In that sense, can they transcend and travel through space if that's what they want to do for whatever divine reason they want to do that? Sure. But no, the gods aren't ancient aliens. They're gods. But again, you get to, if you start extending what that definition means, there's a lot of ways to cloud that or blur the lines of that or whatever. Our gods are gods. Can they manifest physically? Certainly. Must they manifest physically? Certainly not. Do they travel through space? I don't know if they want to. That's not primarily how we know them and how we know of what they, typically do. But if they're bored on a Wednesday night, maybe that's what they do. I don't know. But their very nature as gods implies that they can travel, where they see fit. There's a certain level to where we will never know the entire depth and breadth of what they can and can't do. But no, that's not what we know them as travelers from some far off place. We know them as creative forces of the world in which we live and occupy. Our next question, and I don't understand it, but perhaps Svan does. Could it be that the influence of our A and G's is ingrained in our very blood rather than being a divine intervention from above? Nick says our ancestors and gods. Yeah, I'm not hip with the kids. Mandy uses a lot of that at home too. She'll use some work jargon, and I have no idea what she's talking about with the things. All right, cool. Our ancestors and gods and game. So,
I would love. I got this one too.
This is similar to the last question. They're gods, and our ancestors exist beyond the veil. Anything and everything we do to diminish that or rationalize that into something other or something less cool or less metaphysical or less literally awesome is a disrespect and an impiety. Now, certainly parts of our ancestors influence us from within our very blood. Certainly our gods influence us from within. No part of that takes away from the reality and their immanence in the divine realm and their existence as real and differentiated personalities existing in our present, in our past, and in our future. Both of these questions, and I appreciate all the questions and I appreciate you guys asking. I'm not being rude to the one asking the question. This is for the consumption of the people who are watching this and learning from the answer to the question. Our challenge as religious Asatru art is to reach upwards to try to better understand our gods and pull ourselves, raise ourselves to their level. There is a human tendency when we don't understand them to try to drag them down to our level so that we better understand them. The directionality is very important. I would never want to do anything that diminished my gods so that I could understand them better and hang out with my homie Thor. That's not the right way to do this. I want to raise myself so I can be better in communion with the mighty god Asatru. I don't want to eat chips on my couch pretending I'm playing Xbox with my big homie with the red beard. And it's funny because, like, it sounds funny when I say it that way. There are the adorners of grandma's couches that describe their faith that way. And that's really unfortunate. So that's why I get spicy about the question. Certainly, our gods and ancestors influence us within our very blood and our blood and bones. But they also, and in a much more imminent way, influence and engage in the gift cycle with us externally. Svan, take it away.
Yeah, that last sentence you just said encapsulated everything I was going to say. I think,
but I need to take a bathroom break, so I was counting on you to be more verbose.
Yeah, no. I will be more verbose. I saw that and I was like, oh, never mind. Wait. Yeah. So everything that Alshiragodi just said in that last sentence does encapsulate what I'm about to say. Is I absolutely believe that our gods and our ancestors are intimately connected through our metagenetics. So one thing that you're going to find when you encounter the Asatru Folk Assembly, when you encounter the Godar of the Asatru Folk Assembly, there's going to be some major tenets that are going to be hit. One of them is metagenetics. This is a founding principle from our founder, Stephen McNallen. And this is what you're talking about, that connection that the gods through Ond, the reason why the gods are connected specifically to their people and not to other people is through this, the breath and the creation of the folk, extended even more so with the shaping by Heimdall. So there is this layered connection. And then, of course, too, with our ancestors, because we're intimately tied between all of them. However, you'll also find that a lot of times anything that involves making the gods archetypes, making the gods too internalized, the Asatru Folk Assembly moves away from this because we believe in the gods, but we believe the gods are real. We believe the gods are manifesting in the world through time, through cosmic order. And the breadth and scope of that, we don't fully know. And we see that a lot on VNS. It's like, it'd be very foolish for us to say that farthest sense. So you don't get that in a lot of other religions, especially the universalist ones. Oh no, their divine beings are just responsible for everything and everyone. And you're on the insurance program. If you don't maintain that covenant, you're getting the sizzler. We, on the other hand, don't speak about the Utgard, the folk out. We speak about the folk within, and we speak about the relationship that we have with our gods. They are not just simply the gods. And that is because of the blood. So when you say rather, that's the part that kind of turned away, Raven, was ingrained in our very blood rather than being divine intervention from above. We consider both. That there is the multifaceted. I know you might hear some people say, like, as without, so within, as above, so below. But in essence, that grain of wisdom does ring true. A lot of people do it too. They consider Yggdrasil, and they consider the human body, or Yggdrasil, and for those special guys on X, some of them, the uterus. There's a I'm making a Varg reference. Sorry, man. So there's cyclical natures that do reflect these things, and I've seen it, and I really think I've seen it replayed.
Svan has seen the uterus.
No, not the and placenta talk. Oh, you guys are killing me. No. What I mean is, like, when I give some of the classes, especially like about the goddesses, I talk about what is the German artist with the golden tears, is it Brybeck? I know I'm dropping this on you like super fast, but there's these expressions of the gods that continuously come out of people that may have no inclination. Another great example is I often connect the image of the manifest destiny. So here
Klimt.
we have Klimt.
Gustav Klimt.
Gustav Klimt's Tears of Gold. That's the Holy Freya. And
it actually is not Klimt. It's often attributed to Klimt, but it was actually painted by Anne-Marie Zilberman.
Really? Now I've got to dig into this. All right.
I'm writing that down.
Or at least that's what I'm reading.
Okay. Let me write this down real quick. But either way, again, this growing sense, it happened in the Renaissance. It happened even in the Dark Ages, where the stories started to reemerge again over and over again. Our folk cannot separate from the gods and their ancestors. So we see it. The other one was Manifest Destiny. We have this, high emphasis on the Christian expansion of moving westward, and yet suddenly they place upon the feminine aspect of Manifest Destiny, and it greatly coincides with the corpus of body of the goddess Gevion, the prosperity and the probability of prosperity of the land, the taking of the land. In the stories that we have, she plows the land away from Sweden, and we see her again when the Manifest Destiny spirit shows up and she's floating above the folk. I find it more often, and I don't always write it down. I remember there's a band locally here in Virginia, and they had a song called The Cypress Queen. And the way they're speaking about the Cypress Queen in the song is clearly connected to Yarth or Nerthus amongst the Tacitus version. And again, it's just this bubbling up nature of our folk. We can't be separated from it. But when you speak about divine as interaction, and I'm not speaking for the gods, I know that they can do what they will. But I do believe that a vast majority of the work that is done by the gods is done through the well of earth that is in the heavenly realm, and that it is up there for a reason. It's the sense that wellspring descends down into the middle world. And so their touching of the skein of that well, creating the ripples that affect, and the reason why the Nornir and the gods have synthesized to do these things after Ymir's death. So their interactions, I think, are multifaceted. Can the gods physically manifest? I would never say no, they can't do anything. But just from observation, I believe that the gods do interact in multiple levels, whether it's energy or whether it is, phenomena of a natural kind or a supernatural kind, and also connected to our blood. But yeah, we the Asatru Folk Assembly and the Gothar will always err on the side that even though the gods are within us, they are also external, and we must maintain that gift cycle, and we must always attain the higher, go for the forward and upward with piety and with honor and with a great amount of desire to improve, to become that which we believe the gods want us to be. And the moment you kind of pull it into the body or maybe pull it into an archetype is when you start cramming the gods into frameworks that I don't think well, one, I don't think it's very pious, but I also think it doesn't function very well for the spiritual growth of the people. If we see things only internally and we drag things only inward, we lose sight of that which is around us and about us, the majesty and the beauty of the gods, the terrifying nature of the destruction of that the Jotnar can bring, the natural law, the inescapable cycles that the Vanir bring. We are deeply interconnected to all of these things. So if you end up cutting and severing that connection to the gods, there's other things that are connected to us as well, that we will lose scope of. So I'm speaking from the idea that there are tenets that the Asatru Folk Assembly clearly holds to that you can see when you meet us, versus perhaps if you're meeting someone who thinks that the gods are archetypes and it's only psychological, but that ultimately it's a lesson about us being greater beings and willing to manifest ourselves into godlike beings. And it kind of gets into that Nietzschean atheism. And we're not saying that that's not a proponent for you to attain your woad self. We speak about that in the soul, but we also believe the gods are external and have will and do things and interact with us. So the necessity to emphasize that, I think, is really, really important.
So I'm digging in this Klimt rabbit hole to try to figure out the truth of the authorship of that painting.
Nick just threw the wrench right in there on me.
He did, but I want to get to the bottom of that. So
I'm only seeing one source that says Sieberman, so it may be wrong. But
yeah, but it looks like she did a bunch of paintings that were deliberately, like, they weren't meant to be forgeries, but they were homages to Klimt that this might be one of, but the one that comes up isn't this, but a similar one. But it says that she even like modeled the way she made paintings after his. So I don't know if she made a similar painting along the same theme. I don't know, but we're going to get to the bottom of this because this has got our brains churning.
For people that don't know, the painting is reference or is just the tears of gold, but the connection, of course, is to the Holy Freya when she sheds tears of gold, when her inspiration, when her fury, when Older
immensely powerful piece. If Nick finds a picture of it, he can put it up for us. But it's beautiful. Whoever did it, and either one of them did it with Freya as inspiration. So here's an interesting one. I want Svan to take this one first. Oh, he said the Asatru Folk Assembly errs on the side of divinity. We don't err on the side of anything. We do emphasize the side of divinity, but correctly so. So that said, the question is, how do you guys feel about Vril or the energy behind that, if at all? I think that's a loaded question that has a lot of backstory and mythology and a lot of stuff behind it. I'm curious what how Svan's gonna come at this.
Well, I would have to say, if a word, like symbols, words, and we spoke about this with the Valknad, there is meanings behind words that have connectivity, and I think that this word shares and parallels another word that I would simply use is orlaw, or weird, and the idea that we may be able to understand it, and in understanding it, be able to interact with it better. But I don't really utilize the word. I know that the Thule Society. I know about Madame Blavatsky and the Theosophical Society, and a lot of the usage of these this idea. But I think for me, I simply call it Ore Law. I think that Ore Law is the core sense of energy that works around us, and that we are deeply, and that's what the gods are actually working with when they work through the well, and that we too are able to work with it in different forms. Sometimes I think our will can make a blip in the grand tidal wave, or at least maybe just in the tiny area that we're in, of all the movement, of all the energy and all the vibration and harmonics of the universe. The very stuff that Lord Odin sacrificed himself into. He needed to place himself on the tree in heaven in order to be connected, through the roots and through the tendril, tiny roots, all through the cosmos. Can we perhaps feel or move or turn some tiny modicum of that around us? I do believe we can. I also believe that the far more wiser, because my runic teacher spoke about this. He spoke about the movement of blood and of will, and the idea of making rune stavers that, again, change that Ore Law around you, to whatever consequences or whatever benefits. But he also spoke of the observation of Ore Law, and the idea that, you could manifest and will and pull and push things, or you could learn to observe. And I'm not speaking in a lazy sense, like I don't want to do things, so I'm just going to observe. No, the idea is that observing the way everything is rolling out, and then knowing exactly when to act, knowing exactly how much pressure to apply, or how much of a vacuum you need to make, creates you more of a symbiotic relationship with everything that's flowing. And so he kind of proposed it as a two-house system. And I feel more apt to believe that Vril, or the concept of it, is more built around trying to manifest will and to change things, versus simply the observation of it and learning kind of the sheet music of everything flowing together. And so I have a tendency to just utilize the word Ore Law. Actually, I'm not even 100% sure on the etymology of the word. I know that its usage in like esoteric.
Of Vril?
Yes. I mean, I know of its usage in esoteric Germanic magic, or Germanic like occultism. I also know that wasn't there a book that it was emphasized in as I just don't know the origin of it that much.
Yeah, it's a made up word. Well, I say all words are made up. It's a 1800s created word that doesn't have existing etymology that can be traced. And so this is kind of into my answer on it. Okay.
I'm gonna use the restroom real quick.
All right. So the question is, how do we feel about Vril, or the energy behind that? And I think that's really important. And I did it just a second ago, and I retracted it immediately because I didn't mean to be petty that way. When someone creates a word for something, there's a tendency to, that's made up. I mean, like I said, I just did it a second ago. All words are made up. Language is literally made up. doesn't mean it's not valuable and really important and real, but it is a creation of the minds of men. We use words to describe things. Sometimes those things are imaginary, and sometimes those things are very real. I've mentioned this in terms of like the gods, the names of the gods. Odin never, hi, my name's Odin. Our people applied that name to him to express the way that he manifested to them. The magical power of the flowing energy of the universe and harnessing that is absolutely something that's real and exists. It being called vril is a recent invention, and the term vril becomes tricky because it is linked to a lot of things, some of which are legitimate, some of which are crackpotty and odd, including Nazi UFOs and strange and fantastical machines and guys on the internet that if you send them $1, they can cure your cancer with their vril magic and a lot of things. I think there's a lot of kookery around vril. I think vril is a fun tongue-in-cheek reference often now to male sexual juices. Excuse my vulgarity, but y'all pick up what I'm laying down. So I think the term vril in and of itself gets misused. I think somebody suggested, perhaps a better word for what it means is owned. I guess like the breath of life, in a way that magical currency enhances something that is lifeless and makes it life full. I think that's not a bad way to describe it. The idea of an animating magical force, or divine force for that matter, that moves and does things, certainly. And I think that vril, I guess, is just as good a word for it as anything. I don't think that Orlaw encapsulates it fully because it means other things, but it certainly includes it. I don't think Ond encapsulates it right, or Other, or Law, or any of these other things that we have. I think in a way, Luck and Haminya also are equally as relevant to it, but don't quite encapsulate it. Vril is kind of another way of saying the force. If we're going to use completely modern things, then we get that, whatever that is. And I don't think our ancestors had a precise word for it because there's so many different things that interplay with it differently. But there is in a way, medieval wizards would call it ether or something. This other force out there that you can imbue something with, or that you can harness to do magical things. Spiritual potency is what directs that, and it very much fits in with the things that we talk about when I talk about magic and the ability to recognize synchronicity and to harness it and direct it towards purpose. And I suppose that's vril as much as anything else. I don't think there's the perfect word for it. And because of the kind of nutty overlaps with vril, it's hard to distill it to be as sacred as it perhaps ought to be. But yeah, the concept I absolutely believe is a thing. There's an mostly intangible, tangible by a few who are adept force that exists that can be manipulated towards purpose by those who are skilled enough and, initiated enough to recognize it and be able to make use of it. And in that way, I do think it exists and it's a thing. And that may sound like a whole bunch of gobbledygook, but that's just what I got. Does conflict drive our progress? I find without an external opponent, we risk turning our swords inward, and that hinders our own purpose in life. Svan, if you would like to address that.
Sometimes even with an outside conflict, we still turn our swords on each other. All too often people want to run the show themselves. They can't join the banner. They can't join the team. I mean, it's the story of like Herman the Cheruski, who, unites the tribes to fight, and then they end up, eating each other up alive. But no, yeah, conflict, I think, does progress things on a broad sense. I think that if we speak about conflict, there's never really just one external. There's never really one internal. There's many things that we have to battle against, but it is that conflict that pushes us forward, that makes us reach. I like Alcir Golis spoke about, like, even the conflict of life, the idea that life is not permanent. And so striving to go for something, pushing harder, making better. But not always too. I mean, like, you look at like your children, and that might spurn you on as well. And maybe that's deviating away from the question. I think that conflict is a huge component towards progressing forward in things. It's just that whether or not you choose your battles wisely and what the ultimate goal of your progressing is, kind of like an escalation of a force. If it's an immediate threat, yes, you got to deal with that right away. But if it's like an ever-present force of aggression against you or against your family or against your people, then what you need to do is focus on what best way to combat that. And that oftentimes comes in forms that people don't want. When they have an aggressor, when they have a conflict, they want to go and run at it. They want to get led into every ambush. They want to catch every, they want to silhouette themselves on the hills. And more often than not, it's about acquiring resources. It's about training, or, and I speak about this in military terms because I was in the Marine Corps, but it's about, say, like, reiterating things amongst your family or your people that they need to learn in order to withstand. You can't just go running off into the fights every single time. So I don't know. That's a really cool question. I think it's just, I can't give definitive other than yes, I think conflict does breed progress. Our folk have always been a people of war, but again, how you manifest your dealing with that, and not getting caught up in the need to, like, go and slay the legend of the dragon without actually seeing the dragon ever, versus building upon yourself and building upon your folk and kind of focusing on that positive progress.
So I think that we can look at conflict in some different ways. And like in literature, there's it's a theme in literature when you're writing a narrative. There's man versus man, man versus nature, man versus self, man versus society. And it's very true that necessity is the mother of invention. I think conflict absolutely drives us forward, and it gives us something to overcome. It lays a challenge before us that needs to be met. it's easy to be lazy. The things that make us not lazy are very often needs or, conflict. There's, man, I'm hungry. I'm real lazy, but I'm hungrier than I am lazy, so I'll get up and get some food. Fundamentally, there's all kind of pressure that becomes a driving force. There's a pressure in sexuality that makes people go out and mate. There's a pressure in emotional need for people that also promotes coupling and being part of and engaging with society. There's internal pressure for a lot of things, and conflict is a form of that. You're right. Our people are particularly terrible at dealing with the peace. You can deal with the conflict, but when there's nobody to fight, we sit around and try to pick each other apart and dwindle ourselves into nothingness, much like the gentleman who made the video that we spoke about earlier. That is I did not realize how epically terrible our people are afflicted with that until I became involved in Asatru and in, I don't know, the greater racially aware movement of our folk. That's why we lose the times that we lose, is when we turn upon one another. And that's happened, it happens all of the time now, unfortunately, but it's happened to us throughout history. If we look at the times that we are able to stand together, there's nothing in this world that can stop us. When we see the times that we fail, it's very seldom due to an external foe. It's very often due to us turning upon ourselves. And I think that's a very toxic trait of our people. But yeah, when we have a need that we have to overcome, and part of that's the fight or flight thing. There's a certain, and we've all encountered this in our life. There are people, when presented with a challenge, they curl up in a ball, or they run from it, or they practice forms of escapism. Or the heroes choose to overcome it when there's something like, you can't do this. Oh yeah, watch this. Well, if you don't do X, then, this bad thing's going to happen to your family or to you. Okay, well, we're going to overcome. The ability to overcome challenge and to overcome obstacles is something very beautiful about our folk, and something that our people are able to do in a way that far surpasses others. It is a beautiful trait of our folk. And it's one that's why when I talked about earlier the idea of hopelessness, you lose all of the games that you don't play. And every time, you're called out on the field and you don't show up, it's a loss. When we raise generations of our young people, especially our young men, with the idea that they cannot succeed, then they don't try. When our people have amazed and built this world, were when they were raised with the idea that you can do anything you put your mind to. When especially our young men are taught that there's nothing beyond them if they just try their best, amazing things happen. Earth-shaking things happen. Epoch-changing things happen. We need to reinstill that in our youth. And when I say our youth, I don't just mean the children. There's a lot of men entering their 30s that are still in that youth phase because of the situation we find ourselves in. But yeah, recognizing conflict and rising to the challenge has always been a powerful, powerful force in uniting our folk and getting our folk to move forward with amazing results. Our next question: what is the AFA's view on oaths, boasts, and other binding words? So there's the real politic and the AFA's view on it, and I really don't think there's a lot of deviation or nuance to it. Oaths are really valuable and important. We understand that it is a fundamental sacrament of our faith to take holy oaths and to live up to them. When you make an oath in a religiously recognized context, it becomes worth more than the sum of its parts, and there is more glory than on the face of it in achieving it. When you fail in that, there is greater infamy than would otherwise be assigned to it. We take those things really seriously as a church and as a faith. Realistically, our folk are not worthy of oaths at this point, by and large. We have lost the social binding to where that means stuff. Oaths are binding in the spiritual realm, but what gave the oath so much power to our ancestors was you were known, whether you were a man of your word or not. And if you were not trustworthy and you were a breaker of oaths, that was amongst the highest of, just like in the Old West, if you're a horse thief, that's one of the worst things you can be. And if you were an Asatru or an oath breaker, is one of the worst things you can be. Unfortunately, we are not buttressed with social convention that has extreme prejudice against oath breakers in these days. So far too many of our people, inside and outside, don't take oaths nearly as seriously as they ought to. And we see that all around us. And it's a cultural change we are attempting to make. But unfortunately, we are not there yet. And we do realize that. So we are very careful in oaths that we take, in oaths that we accept. And brick by brick, we are trying to rebuild that structure to where the oath is held as sacred as it once was. But we are a long ways from achieving that at this point. Do you have anything that you would like to add on that, Svan?
Yeah, I would say that one thing that we have witnessed over time is that people make oaths, especially within religious context, and then turn on them without any forethought of basically facing or ending or breaking, or excuse me, not breaking, putting to rest an oath. I think a lot of our folk fail to realize that oaths were not just something that you made and then that was it. There were certain types of oaths like that, but if you make an oath to fulfill an obligation and then you no longer can, and you reach forward to the other side of the oath, the other whether it's a person or group of people, and you say, I'm no longer able to fulfill this, that takes a lot of forethought, and it takes a lot, I think, of personal reflection to do so. The other is if you attempt to, leave the oath and you are afforded a chance to explain yourself, that is a huge level of benevolence on the other side of the oath, and you should absolutely do that. Otherwise, if you leave, if you break, if you run, if you turn, then you are doing that which the oath binding is holding you. And the other thing about oaths is I believe that oaths are directly connected to your soul and to your hamingya, and to not place that state of, let's say you take an oath and you need to renegotiate it based on factors around. And a lot of people get in their head, like, once an oath is made, I can't do that. And it's like, no, you can. It's a thing in our history. But if you don't do that, you are drawing away from your soul. So what I think Alzira Gothi is really trying to emphasize is our social strata doesn't think this way anymore. And it's super important that we get to the point where our culture, where our folk nation and community looks at oath making and oath taking as a testament and then a processes that has your honor in line and is holding your honor in society, but also holding your hamiya in your soul. And so you should take great care to either, deal with that. If you swear to protect someone and then you can no longer do that because you get a debilitating disease, you don't run from that oath. You turn and you reach out to the other side of the oath and you tell them and you face up to the situation. And this allows you to move away from that oath or have that oath changed or dissolved without your honor being lost and without your soul being drained. And again, vice versa. If you take an oath with someone and you're going to be loyal to the end, and then they all of a sudden just fall into dereliction. They become absolute degenerates, and they're doing drugs and living a life that is not befitting their ancestors. You have a right to step forward and say, look, when I took this oath to be loyal to a person who is not this person, and this needs to be ended. There's a lot to that I think people don't get with oath ethics. A lot of it's just simply, I made an oath and that's where I stand with my brother, or that's where I stand with these people, and I am trapped and I can't do anything. Especially like situations like that. I see that a lot where people make oaths into things and then the other side turns derelict, and then they just feel trapped. So there is some of that oath ethics that I think we need to learn as a culture again. The other two is when you make oaths to yourself, and I have made an oath to stop drinking, and I had 3 witnesses, and I actually wrote it out. I think it's very important that you take it very seriously, especially when you make one for yourself. But the problem with that is I don't believe there is as much negotiation when you make an oath for yourself. I think it's actually even harder, and that it's when I speak about renegotiating, or when I speak about properly and honorably stepping away from an oath, that really involves multiple parties, 1 or 2. But when you do one for yourself, I think you should not take that very lightly, and when you do, you take it seriously, and you make you let everyone know, but you're not actually like binding them to the oath. You're just making them a witness. So yeah, those two, just be careful. But oathing is generally in symbols. We see boasts and we see toasts towards each other, and very very rarely is a thulur overworked at an AFA symbol.
Yes, Svan misspoke when he said that he believes. What he meant to said is oaths are absolutely tied to your soul.
It's hard for me to speak as the totality. That's another thing where
it's fun. You got a ring on your finger. Put that back in the mail if you're not going to speak with authority.
I know, good comment.
You are fully entitled to speak the things that you know to be true with authority, and you do. You're just nice, and you don't want to impose upon people too much. But it's important to not equivocate some things that are true. We know these things are true. And our ancestors have always known these things to be true. And I think that something special and remarkable about them is not only do we know that they are true, but whereas the overt religiosity of them may change context, they are culturally true up until we stopped understanding that our genitals reflected our gender. Up until very, very recently, that was sacrosanct, and we all knew that. We got kids listening. I forget that I'm as old as I am when I talk about, my father's generation or my grandfather's generation. Maybe I'm talking about the people listening's great grandfather's generation. But within within living memory, a man's word was his bond. That was a fundamental American value. I have to believe it was a fundamental Western value, but just knowing culture, your oath wasn't expressed in an Asatru context, but if you swore an oath on a Bible on something that culturally we held to be a religious relic, that oath was, that was binding. That would win court cases. That would sentence people to death or let people off. That meant everything. Specifically in this country, up until a certain amount of time, a white man's word meant everything, because culturally that was a fundamental, no, this man does not break his word. That's not what reputable, upstanding white citizens would do, because it was a European value that was so fundamental to who we were. That's personified in Western culture and in cowboy culture and in the movies in the 20s through the 50s and 60s that exemplified that as a fundamental American value. You see that in court to this day, swearing oaths. You see people entering into the military or becoming citizens or testifying in court, and they swear oaths. Those things used to mean something, or they take a political office. Very often we've seen that as just a silly formality in this day and age, unfortunately. But within living memory, it wasn't thus. Oaths are extremely important, and I want us to get back to that place, because whether we recognize their importance socially, they are attached to your soul. Our gods and your ancestors, every one of those generations that I mentioned, from living memory back into the dawn of our race, they judge you by your ability to stand by your word or not. And that matters. It's just really unfortunate if you don't realize that matters until you find yourself on the other side of the veil. And as we've seen, we don't see the social consequence for oath breaking as much in modern Asatru when it happens. But what we very often see, and Svan and I have been doing this long enough, is those who are overtly known for their being oath breakers often have a terrible amount of misery in their life, and their hamenya rots. And that rot often takes their families and friends down with it. What are your views on basically Icelandic sigil magic, on Galdra Brook, the Galdra Book, the August Helmer, the Vegvasir, things of that nature? Svan, I know you got some thoughts.
Yeah.
Drop some wisdoms on folks.
Well, so when you had the books like the Ráðabók or the Svartabók, and they were written by Svan the Black, and these wizardly fellows, what this is really talking about is a time where there is a great influx of medieval magic flowing into the Nordic lands, and specifically Iceland. And I spoke about that earlier. The Icelanders prided themselves on being able to write. They had the book process down, especially because of the vellum. And so the natural production of that is as Christianity starts dealing with its foreignness, and it also has a long-standing tradition of occultism within it, kind of running parallel. It naturally flowed up there, and it was influenced greatly with Nordic occultism, if you will, pre-Christian occultism. And that's what you're really getting, is this synthesizing of the two. And so a lot of folks will say, oh, it's talismanic magic and it has nothing to do with the Vikings. And they are correct. It has nothing to do with the Vikings. But the Nordic people are synthesizing this not based out of a vacuum. They are placing things into it. As far as the absolute functionality of it, I feel that with a lot of folks, when it came to the Catholic Church, there was a sense that they could gain power by doing these things. I think that there was a lot of stuff there where they felt like they needed more control. I think that like after the Malefice Malefactorum and the witch, the hammer of the witch, that was a common thing of the Catholic Church. And then later on, they came on to say, like, no, a lot of these products of this evil is, again, just being in juxtaposition to the power of the church or the presence of it. So I don't think that talismanic magic, especially like the Seal of Solomon and all of that stuff, when you look at that stuff, that's not Nordically based. But when you go in and look at the Golden Book, there are huge nuggets of good, usable, and historical referencing towards the way perhaps that our ancestors thought of magic. The idea of placing runes or placing staves in certain areas, whether it was under the arm or in the footprint of something on the road. I don't think that deals as much with the medieval occult. I think that has a lot to come back. So I would say it's worth looking into. As far as the popularity of the Veivisir, or the Helm of Awe, we know that the Helm of Awe most likely was not used like by any Viking during any Viking battle. It was probably not placed on shields or helms or what have you. But again, the symbol there starts to grow and have its own presence. It has perhaps its own power of that time.
So, flag on the play for a second. We don't know that, and when I say that, I want to say that things are often an evolution of other things. We know that the Helm of Awe is a Viking concept,
and the algaes in multiple directions was absolutely used.
Well, and I say that to say this: when you look at the Sonnenrad that we use as a halo around the heads of our heroes, people want to complain, no, but wait, that's not like the ancient ones, that's like the Nazi one. Yeah, for the same reason. It's a solar one that's 12 spoke, but when you look at them, you see the progression very clearly. You see ones with a variety of different spokes to them in the Germanic migration period. You see them very specifically in the Westphalian area of Germany. You see them in a number of different locations with a different variety of spokes. I've seen 6, I've seen 4, I've seen 8, I believe I've seen 9, all with the same patterning to them. So there's an evolution of symbology. And while the symbols as they're displayed in the Galder book aren't exact replicas of prior things, many of them very well have roots in prior times and in the folk memory of our people and get evolved over time into things. So yes, the August Helmer, in the way that you get the tattoo that you got on the guy at the gym shoulder, is not the one that was likely used in a Viking context. The idea of radiating our runic imagery outward is absolutely an ancient concept and gets used a lot of times. So there's a lot to sigil magic that's draws upon imagery that's important to a people. And you can use imagery that's Jewish if you're making Jewy sigil magic. You can use Christian imagery if that's what you're using. I imagine that other faiths use imagery that makes sense in their context.
I was going to say very little difference between those when you look at the Jewish and Christian.
Yeah, but if you want to use the Christian one, you got to use the like torture devices. I think that's really odd, just as a thing.
Yeah.
I think that is an odd symbology, but I digress. If that's what they want to do, that's their thing.
I don't think that I think we're in the same place when you say that, because I was saying like the core concepts.
Oh, of course we are. I'm just wanting to point out a concept that I don't think people were talking about. Those symbols are not Viking symbols at all. And to think that they are is silly. But they are often made up of Viking symbols. And they very often have their roots in evolutions of symbols that were familiar to the Vikings. But I think people need to also realize Asatru has, to say that it has nothing to do with Vikings is an overstate, that's overstating it. But the reason that it does was Vikings happened to practice Asatru, and from the Viking Age is where we get our literary tradition. But Asatru in a legitimate and unbroken format was practiced from, a little over, from about 1,000 years ago, all the way back to the very beginning of our folk, and is practiced again. It's just as legitimately practiced by us today as it was by Vikings, as it was by migration age Germanic tribes, as it was by the Goths, as it was by the most ancient Aryan, folks riding with the wheel and the donkey, had the donkeys pulling their chariots on the steppes. And to reject imagery because that's not how the Vikings did it is, well, now I can't say something dignified after I made a silly voice, but what I was going to say is sometimes it's come by very honestly by new people that don't have a mature understanding of it yet, and that's fine. If it's by people that have been around for a long time, sometimes it's a willful ignorance or a lack of taking a mature view of our faith.
May I say one other thing about this?
You can say all the things you want.
Well, I wanted to bring up that, does it have relevance? It was synthesized. It was born in the Nordic people, and a lot of symbology throughout Europe, England, Germany, Christianity was synthesized in, and there were, as we spoke before, it's in the blood. You can't escape it. It's part of us. The gods kind of do manifest in our blood. And so you see that happen a lot with other, imagery. And so I think the symbols have relevance, and I think that it's more about how the culture kind of accepts that relevance. I see this a lot with the Othala rune. I get this a lot on the internet where like some schmarmy neckbeard is going to say that the Othala rune you use is the Nazi rune, and it's like the Nazis used it. Yes, but they got it from a German manuscript. They pulled it out of their history. It was synthesized amongst their people. This wasn't something they just pulled out of the air. And that a lot of these symbols become synonymous with us as Germanic Aryans, whether they don't want it to be or not.
So
that doesn't really
matter.
I want
to put a note out here to adults listening to the program. Whatever your views on the Second World War or on European politics of the 20s, 30s, and 40s, the government of Germany and all of its people during that time didn't just decide to do all of the things to see how evil they could be. They did a lot of things to be innovative, or because they were powerful, or because they were efficient, or because they worked well, or because they were good stuff. We don't decide we can't do space exploration because rocketry was developed by the Nazis.
Right.
Yeah, and it's awesome. It was really a very efficient way to project things from the ground to space or to very high Earth orbit. Symbols that are rooted in our shared cultural past are cool because they look cool, they resound with our folk soul, and they have magical potency. Just because it happened in Germany in, a 30-year period in the last century doesn't mean it was inherently evil or bad or whatever. The innovations of an entire nation, or at times an entire continent, aren't. That's not a mature view of things. That's silly on the face of it. These symbols are very often taken from what was it called, house marks and symbology throughout Central Europe, and their roots go back into ancient times. And yes, they were made use of by certain political regimes at certain times, the same way that we all have used symbols throughout history, because they harken back to, points of ancestry or images of the past that we all celebrate, or, the same thing's not applied. There's many versions of Christian crosses that have been used for all manner of different, on both sides of the aisle, political things or racial things, because it's a universal faith, by a myriad of different ethnicities for different specifically ethnic purposes, or for military units, or for civic organizations, or for flags, or for this, or for whatever. You hearken back to symbols that have potency and power, and these symbols harken back to the ancient Germanic past. So, yes, German political and military and anything else are going to use Germanic symbols. That only makes sense. English people are going to use English symbols. And if you take them back far enough, they become the same symbols.
Right.
That's just kind of how migrations of peoples work.
Yeah, hearing people say, "Oh, they appropriate or they stole this," etc., is kind of ridiculous. And for anybody that's interested in learning, the symbol is called Erdra. It's in a medieval runic manuscript. I think Nigel Pennick speaks a great deal about it. So.
And then our next question: why does the AFA not view the Eddas as scripture? Because the word scripture is loaded and means something different. Books that we typically encounter that we would call scripture are specifically written for that purpose. And I do think that the Eddas are holy, but I think them being scripture is different. The author of the Eddas, there's no point where they're, and then Odin came unto me in the cave and told me to write these things in this way. That's just not true. That's not how they were created. Very often within the text themselves, it's understood that they're written for poetic instruction, or they're written for, comedic verse structure. And there's different purposes the poems are written for. When you look at something that is understood to be scripture, like the Quran, Muhammad says, no, and then I went into a cave, and then Allah took hold of my hand and made me write the stuff this way. Or, the Christian Bibles or the Torah, all of those things, those different scriptures in there, the pretext for them being scriptures is that they're the divine word of their God through an oracular function and them writing them down that way. There's no claim or pretext that that's what we have in the Eddas. Now, the Eddas are absolutely holy. They're sacred lore. They're awesome. They're special. They're, exalted. They're all of these things, but they're not. They tell stories that are the divine inspiration of our gods. But a documentary about the book of Matthew, the documentary isn't scripture. It talks about scripture, and we have parts of our lore that express divine truth, but the telling of the story itself isn't done with that intention and with that caveat to it. And if it was, it would be done in a very different way. It's not to diminish the Eddas at all. It's just to be honest and to be truthful. One of the big things that's very important to me is I'm never going to lie to you people. Me and Svan are not in the business of telling you things that we do not believe are absolutely true. It would be helpful to just say, no, the Eddas are lore. They're divine scripture. This is the word of Odin. Everything I say flows from the mouth of the All-Father. I'm not going to tell you things that I don't believe are true. That's our responsibility. It'd be cool if they were scripture, but they're just not. Do you have anything you'd like to add to that, Svan? But Svan is muted.
Sorry, we talked about the blood earlier, about the connection of the divine through the blood. So Snorri and all of the folks that were invested in compiling these stories into poetic verse, I believe, was holy manipulations and machinations for, I think, a reason to ensure that there was a seed that would be able to grow again. And so, and most Asatru, if you ask them, like, do you think that like the Eddas were kind of like Lord Odin's way of kind of ensuring that after the long winter, the spring would bear fruit? And I 100% believe it. But that's the difference between like a Messiah cult religion and Semitic religions and our faith of, and I'm talking about any like Aryan faith of all the way from India to Iceland, is that the stories have been passed down to us. I often refer to the first storyteller as Kvasir. Kvasir speaks the first stories to humanity, to the folk, and speaks about the stories, and then they pass on. They were poetically written at a very interesting time, and they survived in a very interesting way in order for us to continue on and reconnect the somewhat of a severing from the gods. I don't think that they left us while we were separated, if you will. Like, again, I spoke about the manifest destiny spirit, or Columbina, and the gods manifest themselves often. We can't separate ourselves from the gods. The striker will always show up. The dynamic Lord will always show up. He is always around and influencing. So when we talk about that, and like what Alcirigo said, Messiah cult, and the title Messiah only really exists in non-Aryan religions, like the Semitic religions. Messiah cults are built around mortals, and those mortals are saying, my hand guided this. And then when you point out certain things like that, the flood story of the Bible is a carbon copy of the Sumerians, and they're like, well, the story was told before it was written down. So that means that they're not, the Babylonians didn't have the story first, because it was It was talked about before it was written down. We don't get ourselves caught in that trap. We know that the stories have all been passed down over time. It was the poetics of the Icelanders that was trying to ultimately be preserved. And that's the other thing too, is as Alvíssmál said, it would be cool to say, but then you have to, and you'll see people that kind of try to push it. They try to make Snorri like a messiah or a prophet, and you'll see them start to do that. And I think that historically we know enough to know that, you know, I don't think he was a prophet of sorts. But does he have Germanic blood in him? Does he have the Ond? Does he have the inspiration of Lord Odin in him? Yes, he does. Thus making it holy, not a again, a verbatim Lord Odin coming to Snorri and stating, you know, you misspelled this, you got to write that.
Just because something's convenient doesn't make it true. And truth is really important. It's one of our values, and it's a very important responsibility when you take on the role of a Gothi, is to communicate with absolute truth when you're speaking about our faith. There's a responsibility there. And if we're going to, you know, I half jokingly, reminded Svan, like, no, you speak with authority when you say, because we do. And just as much as that's a proactive, like, no, you are entitled to say this is this and that's that, it also means, no, you're responsible to get that right. It's responsible to, when you use your Gothi voice, you've got to be expressing the truth as you know it. And, you know, all of us are very committed to doing that. I will immediately defrock. We don't have an appropriate Asatru term, but I will immediately defrock anybody who I feel is deliberately misrepresenting something as an AFA Gothi. I will not tolerate that, and I will not do that myself. I swear that to you now and forever. The original Black Sun, one form, is called the Zierscheibe, and it has a swastika in it. Any thoughts? Have you seen the brooch with the Zierscheibe on it? Yes, absolutely. And there's a bunch of them. And, you know, I've seen the one with the swastika. I've seen all manner of variety. That just basically means decorative circle thingy. Pretty decorative circle thingy. And there's a bunch of different motifs of it. And they're, you know, almost all solar imagery. That's obviously that. You talk about the swastika, that's been a holy symbol of Aryan people since, you know, ancient times. As a matter of fact, and they often don't show, it's unsung a little bit. It's a symbol that's on the Snodelev stone, rune stone, that the AFA's trihorn is modeled from. On that stone, there's a progression of solar symbols. There's a very old, and it's, you know, you don't see it with the red. A lot of people, when they see the rune stones and other rock art in Scandinavia with like red outline, that's not original. That's a modern thing to help us see the old worn stone engravings. But that's not like ancient red stuff that's been in there since you know, Neolithic times. So often it's not outlined in the red, but you see the trihorns, you see the swastika in its, you know, very familiar form, and you also see a faint but a much bigger four-spoked sun wheel. Looks like it's a progression of image carved on this same rune stone over a long period of time. And that one's much more faded and worn away. But those are, you know, all images that are on. Look at you, Nick, on top of things. And if you see, on his top circle, if you expand that circle out, the swastika's in the lower left quadrant of the bigger four-spoked solar cross that I was talking about. But yeah, that's really cool. I actually got to visit that stone itself in the Copenhagen Museum with our founder, Steve McNallen, and that was a really cool moment the first time. And not supposed to, so the Danish authorities may come after us, but it's really cool. In Europe, at least back then, and I don't know now, you didn't have, roving mobs of people that like to deface stuff. So it wasn't cordoned off or you couldn't, whatever. We were able to get very, very close to it and actually put our finger on it and touch it. And that's really kind of a physical touch with something like that is a real special thing that kind of connects you. And I very much appreciate that opportunity. And just because we're doing show and tell on it, I don't know if Nick has the photo handy, but I do because it was super important to me. So I'm sending it to Nick and he can put that up.
May I speak to while he's about the Zierschreiber or Scheibe. The spokes, I just looked it up. I wanted to make sure because I was gonna the one that I linked in on has 9 spokes. The spokes, of the esoteric Svartsana of Vril and what have you. I've seen ones up to 24 spokes. And then of course when you look at the green Sonnenrad or Svartsana in Veffelsberg Castle, I believe that is 12 spoked, but there was a 9 spoked one. The significance of spokes and the usage of it within our lore, the 12 holy gods. There are 12 aus. So the 12 spokes and then the 12 hours of the day. It's just the symbol and the number of spokes represent cosmic order. That 12 is that sacred number, and the only time anything ever switches over to like a triplicate like 3, it means that it's dynamic. It doesn't mean that it's evil or anything like that. I was actually talking to some people about that with the idea of like 12 months versus 13 months, and I think that it was understood by our ancestors that the 13-month year was seen as a dynamic turnover, and then it would shift back to the normal, back to the way it should be. So you kind of needed this energy to shift from one state to the other, instead of viewing it as, robbing from the dynamic. It's the triplicate, the triple horn, the triple triangle, all of these things representative of dynamicism that needs you to move from one point to another. But seeking stability, seeking order.
There's the picture. Yeah, it was really cool. There were so many neat things at that museum that were just kind of out there, and you didn't have the same disconnected feeling that you have at some similar kind of places in the United States. So it was really nice to stumble upon these really amazing things. We didn't know what we would encounter in that museum. Actually, the Viking section was like, we were trying to get to that, and before it, we came to all these really cool Neolithic things like the Trondheim solar chariot that you always see with the very ancient solar disc being pulled by the horse. That we just walked around a corner and that kind of hit us in the face and was amazing. We walked through and came face to face with this aurochs skull, and it was just a really cool experience over there. But yeah, and then last question of the night. Are you guys ever planning on? There we go.
Dang.
Look at that.
Nick.
Quick draw, Nick. Yeah, that thing just boom out of nowhere, and it was displayed really cool with like LED light on it that was reflecting off it. It was awesome, and it was completely unexpected. I didn't know that's where it was located. Are you guys ever planning on traveling to Europe again in the future? Absolutely, but I don't have a firm plan on what that looks like, when and where yet, but I would love to. I've been able to travel to Europe 4 times now. I would love to do that again. Twice of those, 2 of those times were with the Asatru Folk Assembly, and I would very much like to do that again someday. But I don't have any current plans in the queue for that. Svan, you got any current European excursions on your list?
Oh, I wish. I have family in the waypoint in between, and I would love to go do like a kind of a Baltic Sea roundabout, Norway, Sweden, but then check out like Latvia and just kind of see some of the more inland Baltic ideas. Finland and
I have to
Denmark.
go to Gotland. That island is amazing, and I've always wanted to go there.
Yeah, I really want to see Zealand too, because my ancestors come from Zealand, and originally old, way back. And I would love to, go and see them. Maybe spit some curses at the Danes. No, they kicked us out of there.
All right, guys. Well, thank you so much for your questions and for being here and for bearing with my technical difficulties and my less than stellar camera this evening. Hopefully, Nick will help me. In the meantime, we can get that squared away. I will see you guys next week. And thank you all so much. If you can make it out to Montana for Freyr's Harvest Feast, I would love to see you there. I'm excited about heading out there. I'm going to head out Friday morning. So it would be awesome to see you guys there if you can. If not, or even if you are there, I will talk to you guys again next week, same time. And remember, until then, hail the Aesir, hail the folk, hail the AFA. And remember, victory never sleeps.
All right.